So I'll just start as we wait for people to filter in to go through some of the questions that people sent during sign up. So one of them was about when you're working with multiple lists of data and you need to compare those lists to find or mark duplicates. So we have a few examples of this. There's one. If you go to public.getgrist.com, there's a few publicly shared documents. Normally, these are things we create when we answer questions in the forum, which is a great place to ask questions. And here there's a few examples. How do you find duplicates within the same column? How do you find duplicates in two different columns in the same table? And how do you find duplicates in two different tables? In all of these cases, it's some iteration of combining lookup records with len. So what might be helpful is there is a YouTube video that goes that we have on YouTube that goes in depth, explains how to do that. In that case, it's the same column, but you're basically applying the same concepts in all of these different situations. And we have a formula cheat sheet that has finding duplicates and also uses conditional formatting to show the duplicates as well. So there's a lot of resources, and the formula cheat sheet is pretty new. There was a few questions about, what are the most used formulas, or, how do I get started with Python? Formula cheat sheet's a great place to start. It's broken up into math functions, working with strings, dates and time. And then another great resource here under using formulas is references and lookups. So this is using the power of relational data within Grist, but then how do you do fancier lookups and record sets and things like that. So both of those articles are really helpful. And I think Natalie's providing links in the chat if you need it. Someone else asked, how do we compare to other similar tools? So we have a write-up in our blog comparing us to Airtable. Here, let me actually just show where that is. Natalie's also sharing it in the chat. So we have this one. Zoom doesn't open it. There we go. So we have a write-up of Grist versus Airtable. In our community forum, we have a comparison with base row as well. And if you have any questions about another specific product, I'd be happy to answer in the forum. And in terms of comparing Grist with general spreadsheets, not with other relational database type products, there's two webinars that cover this pretty well. One of them is the very first webinar, which covers the dry principle. And then there's the webinar we did last month, which takes a very specific use case and compares how it's handled in Excel versus Grist. So those two webinars also help reinforce a lot of concepts or the differences between spreadsheets and something like Grist. And we'll be looking at that again today when we talk about structure. There was also a lot of questions about just relational data, linking data across different tables. And we'll be doing some of that today, but there is a reference column playlist on YouTube where it's a discrete set of videos, short videos in a row that go through how to use reference columns to create relational links. And there is an accompanying article in our support site as well, which Natalie will share in the chat. And I think next month we're going to focus on specifically when you have a lot of tables, how do you make sense of those relational links? Because I think that question was asked 3 times. So that'll be the next webinar. Okay. And then somebody asked how to create relations between tables using the API. So it's still best to set up a document using the Grist application. And then once you have the document set up the way that you would like, then it's a good idea to use the API to add or update records in that document. And then all those relations are created by populating those reference columns. And when you're doing that, it's important to be aware of how Grist identifies records. That's gonna come up in today's webinar as well, so I'll be reinforcing this. But the idea is that each record has an ID, and that is what a reference column stores. We're going to see that today when we do access roles on a reference column. There's also a question about automations. So internal automations, like click a button and generate a certain template of rows in another table. That sort of stuff is not yet supported yet, but we'd love to hear more use cases about which automations are most useful. So please share that in our community forum. If there's anything that you would like to do with external data, we have third-party integrators and there's a REST API. You can find that in our support set as well. Yes, and I already shared the formula cheat sheet. That was next. Oh, and there was a more specific question about structuring tables to do queries for performance and manageability. So it seemed very specific. When you have a very specific use case and you're trying to work out the structure, it's a good idea to either ask on our forum or you can reach out via the Sprouts program. So if you go to our website under resources, there's talk to an expert. You can also find it from our homepage. There's a 30-minute consultation where if it's a very simple thing, we might just point you in the right direction and not necessarily pair you with a consultant or anything like that. It sort of depends on your use case, but I encourage people to take advantage of that. Okay, so I think I'll start with the actual webinar. So this is the July webinar, but it will be recorded and uploaded on YouTube, where we have a playlist of all of the previous webinar recordings as well. And this month, what we're going to look at is structure. So last month, we took a particular use case, which was tracking and combining a bunch of different spreadsheets and putting it all in one place. It was expense tracking at companies. This month, what we're looking at is, what if you're sort of doing something in Excel, but you're not getting the data insights or the workflow that you need. So when you go to migrate to Grist, there's still a lot of questions about what the structure should be. So you have some of the data you need, but you can't anticipate yet how something is going to be built. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So we're going to be looking at a fake company called Totally Real Fishing Charters and Tours. And Totally Real has an accountant on staff who's named Tina Shark, of course, who she tracks revenue and sales commissions. So every sale of a fishing expedition is tied to a sales rep. And then there's a commission that the sales rep got, and then there's a payout. She manages this template that she found online. But of course, Tina, she's also HR. She's the admin assistant. She keeps track of expedition bookings. Like many small businesses, this company could not exist without Tina. She found this template. She is the keeper of it, but every month she needs to duplicate it to track that month's sales. And at the end of the month, her boss wants to know what was the total revenue that month, what was the total payout. But of course, the manager and all of the sales reps also want this information throughout the month. They want to know, oh, what's the payout looking like today? And it's the 10th, and they're going to ask again on the 14th. So this is something that a lot of people want access to, but only one person actually has access to. And it requires a lot of manual maintenance to maintain it. And which means it's prone to human error. And it doesn't scale very well. If there's ever a second Tina hired at this company and they each have a copy of this, it'll quickly fall out of sync. So there's a lot of reasons why Tina might want to look for another solution. Also, it's just hard to get data insights from this. It's hard to see who are your top performing salespeople. It's hard to see who are your highest grossing customers, your repeat customers. How are your sales doing over time? So there's a lot of reasons why we might want to do something like this and better in a different tool. So let's start building something like that in Grist. So because we're thinking about structure, maybe before we start importing data, the very first thing we want to do is just think about what is the actual functionality that we want. So I'm just going to create a table and just take those notes and create tasks that we're going to do on this webinar. I'm going to call it workflow. You can call it whatever you like if you want to do this. So it's just basically like a table that's a guideline as you're building something. So what is the functionality that you want? And then we want a column on whether or not it's done. So as we're building it, we can make sure that we check things off. And I'm going to add here data tables so we can think through, as we're building all of these dashboards and these views, what is the underlying data you need to support that? Okay. So the very first one, well, let me actually just format this very quickly. This is going to be, so you can open and close the creator panel, which configures everything in Grist over here on the top right. So you can either edit the entire table or the widget that you're looking at or a particular column. And I'm saying this functionality column is going to be text. And I'm going to do some text wrapping because the text might get pretty long. The next one is a simple switch. I just want to say, check it off if it's done. So it's a simple toggle column. So I could check things or uncheck things. And then this one is also just text, maybe some text wrapping. Okay. And if you're completely new to Grist, the way that you add a new row is this. You just enter something in this lightly gray row here if you're completely new. So let's start writing our functionality. So the very first thing we want to do is replicate what we have in Excel. You enter sales data, you enter the sales rep's name, and you automatically calculate the commission owed to that rep. So in this case, what is the data that we need? We need sales data. which we have. And one of the things in the Excel document is it's repeating the sales reps because they have more than one sale in that month. But in Grist, as we think about what it is that we want to build, we might want to instead have a separate table of reps, all of the sales reps, and each sale is related to that rep. So which would make it easier to click on a rep and see their sales. So we might want to start pulling that information out. So we want a table of reps. One of the other things that's the manager asked that he would like to see is he wants to see what are the total sales over time. Over time, by customer, by month, year. So all these different dashboards. He wants to be able to drill in and see the commission as well for reps, and then over time and customer, just revenue. So in this case, what do we need? We need summaries of sales. So pivot tables. We're going to be building that in Grist. Okay. And it seems like the manager also wants to know things by customer. So similarly, in the Excel, we have a bunch of customers and some of them repeat. So we could just link each one of these sales to a particular customer, similar to what we want to do with reps. So we also need a table of customers. Okay. And then what else? What are the other workflows that we want to make possible? So we want to make it possible for reps to enter their own sales data. There's no reason why Tina needs to be the person doing the data entry on every single sale. It'd be great if somebody could come in here, see just their sales, no one else's, enter new information. So we'll be using access rules to do that. It would also be great if for maybe a little competition is healthy. So maybe we don't want sales reps to see their individual sales, like other people's individual sales, but we want them to see the aggregate to create a leaderboard, see who's doing the best. So we want salespeople to see the aggregate, but not see any commission or payout information or sales details. Okay. We want to make it possible for the business owner to see everything, all the summary dashboards, but not edit anything because he might make a mistake and break something. So for him, he's just going to come in and see everything. And then lastly, if we're letting the salespeople edit sales as they come in, they probably shouldn't be able to edit the commission rate because they might sneakily just get a bigger payout. So let's prevent sales reps from editing the commission rate. So this is a good starting place for today. This takes what was possible in Excel and it builds on top of that. So we're going to go through and make sure that we do all of these things. So now we're ready to start importing the data that Tina has. Before I continue, are there any questions about the goal here or what we're doing between functionality and tables? As I start importing things, I'll show that difference more clearly too. Hi, Marla. Glad you joined. And Eduardo. A lot of familiar names. Okay, so let's start importing. So we're going to import. We have a full month of data for June. So let's go ahead and import that. So we're just going to import it into a new table. When I'm importing from Excel, I like to make sure there's no strange Excel things that come through. Sometimes there's hidden columns, formulas you don't need that was trying to force something to work somewhere else. So the first thing I look at is, are there any extra columns? I don't see any. And then here, there's this extra row. This is that total revenue that was happening here. So a key distinction between Grist and a spreadsheet, it's with a database, everything is very structured, which means in every single table, every record has to be the same type of thing. So every single row or record has to be a sale, which means you don't put the sum in the same grid. You handle sums in pivot tables. You can use formulas to do different things, but this is not a sale, right? Every single row in this table should be a sale. This is going to be our sales table. So we're going to delete this and we're going to get those totals the Gristy way. So now let's go through and make sure that all the columns are formatted correctly. So we have a date column here. The column type is date. This is where you can choose all the different column types. It is a date. You can change the formatting if you like to a different format. So that looks good. Then we have the customer text. That looks good. And keep in mind, we want to relate this to a customers table. So we're going to make a customers table, and then this will become a reference column. We'll do that step in a second. Order number, text looks good. The revenue, the amount sold. This should be I'm just going to use, it is numeric, and I'm just going to make it currency, so it looks nicer. Sales rep, same thing as customer. We're going to make this a reference column once we have that other table set up. The commission rate, we can make this a percentage. It's always going to be the same. So it would be helpful if every time someone created a new sale, it would just give the correct rate. We could do this with a formula, which would, so let's say we did this with a formula. In Python, if you're going to like enter that value, you can do it between quotes to enter a string. So this means every single time somebody enters a new sale, it'll give you the 7%. But I actually recommend in this case, what you really want is a trigger formula. So I'm going to quickly explain that difference. So a formula is always updating. It's the way that formulas would behave in a spreadsheet. But it's possible that the commission rate might change sometimes. And then if you change it in this formula, it's going to change for everything, including historically, which we don't actually want. So if you make it a trigger formula only triggers when certain conditions are met, like when a new record is created, or when something changes in the record. You can specify which field changes. So in this case, we're going to say when applied to new records. So what this lets us do, it's again, when you add a new record, it appears, but I can overwrite it after that because it's not constantly firing. So I'm not editing the formula, I'm changing the data. It's still storing that actual data. So that's useful in case for whatever reason, the commission rate changed at some point. So I recommend doing this as a trigger formula. We have a webinar that goes into the difference between standard spreadsheet normal formulas and trigger formulas. And also you'll notice that the formula here is applying to the entire column. So in a spreadsheet, you have to always update the range. And in a database, it's going over the entire column. Okay, so the commission amount, this should be a formula as well, because the commission amount should be the revenue times the commission. And then we can make this dollars, deductions, currency as well. And then the payout should also be a formula. So we're saying what is the commission amount minus any deductions. And it should also be a $sign. And I'll stop here in case there's any questions. And also to get a drink. Okay. So if you remember from our, let's name this table. Sales. Okay. So you'll remember in our workflow table, we need a sales table. We also need a reps table and a customers table. So we have here customers, some of them are repeating. So I'm going to show you a clever way to dedupe this. So when you create a summary table, you're aggregating by a particular field. So one way that we can create this customer table is on a whole new page. I'm going to summarize sales by customer. So what I'm saying is group all the customers that are the same together. So here you can see who the actual customers are. And what Grist is doing is that it's automatically tallying all the numeric fields from the underlying table, the sales table, and giving you a count. So there was 2 sales for Soul Solutions, 3 sales for Serene Marine. There's a theme with all the words here. But we're actually just trying to create a customer table, not a pivot table. This is just a way to dedupe. So I'm going to detach. And when I detach, it's no longer a pivot table. It means it's no longer actually updating based on how the underlying data is changing. I'm just trying to create a table of customers. And it creates a new table. I don't need this because this isn't actually a pivot table. So I'm going to delete those columns. I have my customers here. I'm going to rename this. So now I have a customers table. I have 2 views of it because I had made that summary table. We don't need this. We just need the one view. And now when I go back to sales, I want to link each one of these to that new table, the customers table. So in the customer column, I can make it a reference column. This is how you create the relational link in Grist. So a reference is one-to-one. One sale is attributed to one customer. A reference list would be one-to-many. One sale could be multiple customers. In this case, it's always one-to-one. And because Grist recognizes that this is also in the customers table. It's already making a best guess. It's saying, oh, you're linking to data in the customers table based on the customer name. If that was wrong, you could always go through and change what table and how the matching is happening. So we can apply. We're going to repeat those same steps to get to dedupe the sales reps. So on a whole new page, I'm taking the sales. This time I'm grouping by sales rep. So I'm combining all the ones that are the same. I'm going to go into table, data. So there's like these sub menus here, data, detach. So it's no longer a summary table. I'm going to name this reps. Because it's not a summary table, this doesn't make sense anymore. That won't be updating. A normal summary table will, and we will be building those. And I don't need this view. Okay. So we have the 3 tables from the workflow, and in the sales table, everything is set up with formulas so that when you add a new sale, it all updates across the board. So it's not auto-filling yet certain things, but the idea is you put in a sale and we know what the payout is. So we can go back to our workflow, and this, which is replicating what's possible in Excel, this is done. Now we want to start showing totals across time, customers, and reps. So we're going to start building summary tables again. Let's start with time. So we're on a whole new page. We're going to summarize sales. You have to click the sigma icon to summarize the underlying data, but you don't have to choose a group by column. If I do choose one, then I am grouping by, like we saw, customers or reps. If I select nothing, I'm just summarizing the entire table. And I want to do that for all time sales. So I can see all time sales. There's been 30 sales. That's the total revenue. It automatically takes the sum of all numeric columns. In this case, that doesn't make sense for commission rate. So I'm just going to make this an average. And there we go. That got fixed. You can change those formulas. And then we can see the commission amount, deductions, payout. And now we also want to group things by year and by month. To do that, we need year and month in the underlying table. So I'm just going to go ahead and create those fields. So we'll do year. And if you've seen some past webinars, you've seen me do this before. Or what I'm doing is I'm using a formula to take the date, and I'm using a Python method, strftime, to put in a little code that will extract the year. So this isn't our formula cheat sheet, and that little code comes from, we link to this in a few places, and the idea is you just see what it is you want. So like the capital Y gives you the 4-digit year. And then I'm going to combine that with the lowercase b to get the month as well. So you've probably seen me do this before if you've come to other webinars, or Natalie. So I'm going to take that same thing and add it for month. Oh, there we go. Okay, these don't need to be visible in order to summarize by it. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. I just need that in order to create that summary table that groups along those columns, but I can hide it. And you can see everything that's hidden over here. So if you come over to when you're selecting a widget, you can see what's visible and what's hidden. That's a quick way to see it. Also, if you were to add new, it'll show you what's been hidden too. Or another way to see what's hidden, since we're talking about structure, we're working here with views of data, but if you ever want to see what is my actual data, you can go into raw data and you can see where your actual tables are. So you can see that sales tables there, reps, customers, that summary table we just made with the totals. Oh, workflow has a typo. All right, look at that. Okay, so we can go ahead and summarize now by year and by month. So we can add another widget to this page. So I'm taking sales, summarizing by year. And then what I would like to do is click in a year. Hopefully, if we're still using this years from now, click in a year and see the months in that year. So I'm going to summarize again by year and by month, and then select by year. So what this lets you do is, later in the webinar, I'll add a 2023 one, so you can see it'll add another number here. And then when I click on 2023, it'll show the 2023 months. And then once I click on a month, I might want to see the actual sales. So now I'm not summarizing. I want to see the sales in that group. So I'm going to make this a little bit prettier by clicking and dragging. Okay. We can start hiding things we don't need. You can go through and hide in the columns. Sometimes I like to do it in bulk over here because you can just select all and then decide what you do or don't need. You can get rid of count. So I want count, revenue, and payout. I want to hide the rest. And I'm going to do the same here. So I'm just hiding things that aren't as helpful. And then we can line this up a little bit. So you just scan, you see count, revenue, and payout. And when you click on a month, you can see all of the related sales. And we'll be adding different months and years so you can see how that works too. Okay, so here we have sales over time. So now let's summarize by customer. That was another request. On a new page, sales summarized by customer. And in this case, all the commission payout information isn't really relevant. All we really care about is the revenue and the count. So we can go ahead and delete that. Revenue, let's sort from big to small. And then this is how you save it, or also would be like a transient sort. So this way it's there on reload when other team members come. You're saving it for everyone. I'm going to call this sales by customer. And now we're going to do the rep one, same thing. On a new page, sales by sales rep. And we'll just rename this. Okay, let's go back to workflow because I'm starting to forget what we wanted to do. Okay, so we wanted to do total sales over time by rep, by customer. Got it. Great. Now we want to make it possible for reps to enter their own sales data and only see their own sales, but still have a leaderboard so they can see who's performing best with the total sales. Okay, so now we need a dashboard for simple data entry and some access rules to make this possible. Let's go look at the dashboard first. It'd be helpful if a sales rep could just come in here, click on their name and see their related sales and add a new one. So let's go ahead and add to this existing page sales, not summarized, based on the summary group in the summary table above. So I'm going to put it underneath here. So when I click on Harry, I see Harry's, Willa's, I see Willa's, Lance, Marlon. Again, you might notice a theme. So, okay. So we want to start looking at some access rules. I'm actually going to open this in a new tab so we can look back and forth while we're making access rules and make it easier to see exactly what we want to do. So if you're new to access rules, there's a whole webinar about access rules that covers, how to do this. The default rules that every single document has says if you're an editor or an owner. So what we mean by user access, it's the access that different users on this document have. Are they an owner, an editor, a viewer? So if they're an editor and owner, they can read everything in the document. They can update data, create new rows, delete data, and they have schema edit permissions. So schema edit means creating and deleting tables, columns, changing formatting, layouts and views, and formulas. Formulas are very powerful in Grist because if you don't have access to a certain table, but you can write formulas, if you're clever, you can pull information you shouldn't have access to. So that's why it's under schema edits. So in this case, all of our sales reps are going to be coming in. We just don't want people who have editor access to ever have schema edits. So we'll prevent that. And you'll notice that I used a double equal sign. So access rules are written in a simplified form of Python. And in Python, a single equal sign is defining a variable, and then a double equal sign is comparing. So is this? Are they the same? So we're going to prevent schema edits. So we wanted to add rules so that when somebody logs in, based on who they are, they're seeing different things. So to do that, we need to set rules about who they are when they come in here. So we share this via email. So let's start keeping track of emails. Because we're going to create special user attributes in our access rules. So I'm just going to come up with totally real emails. Okay, and then we have Willa here. And let's add one more person. They have a manager who should be able to see more than the rest of them can, who has like a lot of read only. So this manager, we can just make this a toggle. And this also makes it easier for the company to grow. Whenever a new manager comes in or somebody should have manager permissions, you just toggle this and suddenly what they can see is different than if they didn't have it. So it's a little bit of thinking ahead as well. So going back to what we want here, we're saying, let's work from top to bottom. For the summary table, I want Harry to see everything in this row and everything in these columns. But this information, especially the commission amount, deductions, and payout, this should be censored. And maybe even commission rate. I don't know. Maybe sometimes people have different commission rates. So we want to hide this unless you are that person. And then we also want it so that Harry can see his sales, but not the other sales. So we're going to go and create those access rules. So the first thing we're going to do is create a user attribute. I'll show you what that means in a second. So there's certain default attributes that Grist knows about someone when they log in. Their access to this document. Are they a viewer, an editor, an owner, the email they logged in with, their user ID, their name, and some other things. We're saying when someone's logged in, look at their email, look it up in the reps table. That's this table that we made here. Look it up in the email, in the reps table in the, did I change the name? Did I do this backwards? Sorry. Reps, probably did a typo somewhere. Look up in reps. I'm blanking on why this isn't here. Dimitri, if you're on, I just did this a second ago. I should have lookup column as email, but it's not showing up. I'm trying to think if I blocked myself somehow. Okay. Yep. Just making sure I didn't name something the wrong thing and then confused myself that way. Okay, let's see. Oh, there it is. I don't know why it wasn't showing up. Now it did. It must have just been a refresh since I just added that column. So that's probably just needed to refresh. Okay. So I'm naming an attribute, looking it up in the table, email. So what this does is it lets me call on this new user attribute that's in this email column. So it's looking it up. And what that does is when it finds it, anything in that row, I can now use an access rule. So I can say something like, once you find Larry, use the value under manager. Okay. So going back to the rules that we want to set up. Here it is with sales rep. In the summary table, we're going to start creating rules for this one. So the sales summary by sales rep. The first thing I want to do is make sure that Tina doesn't get locked out. So Tina is an owner. She can do everything. Let me just scroll down over here. And the next thing that I want to do is if the user dot reps. So what does this mean? This reps is the thing that I just named, which is doing a lookup in that table. So it's doing a lookup in this table. And it can look in any of these columns. So it's saying if the manager column is true, so I've hit that checkbox, then they should be able to read the whole thing. I'm giving them read-only access because I don't want him to mess anything up. Actually, let me be more clever about this. Everyone can read it. Let's do everyone can read it, and I'll show you why in a minute, because these things sort of cascade. So everyone can read this, but now there's certain columns that are hidden. So we're going to hide commission amount, commission rate, deductions, and payout. So if you remember, if we come back here, it's these 4 columns. These are the ones where only if you're a manager or if you are the person who is looking at this, only then can you see it. We need to make this a reference as well, just so that it knows that. Okay. So show it as sales rep. So we're coming back to these rules. Again, Tina should be able to see everything. Owner, allow all. If the user is a manager, then it should be read only. And this is the part where it gets tricky with ID, which I mentioned earlier, which is what we're saying is look up in this table, in this field, the record in this field. So record sales rep. So it's saying look up in this column and see if it matches the sales rep ID. So this is what I was talking about during questions about how a reference column is storing an actual ID. So even though you're seeing a name here, even though you're seeing Harry Harpoon, the name isn't what's being stored, it's the ID that's being stored. And you can see that if you click down here, row ID. So it's storing in the reps table, he's number 1. And if I were to sort this, like say I sorted this by revenue, top to bottom, you can see that that ID stays the same. It's not the same as the row count over here. It's the actual ID of the underlying record. So the reason I wanted to expose that is if we come over to rep, I'll show you, if you do a formula that's just this, it shows you that ID. So Harry's always number 1. Willa is always number 2. Lance is number 3. That's the matching that we're doing. We're saying we're matching when the person logs in. If that's the ID that they have over here, then show them this row. It's a little tricky, and there is a YouTube video about exactly this. So there's a YouTube playlist that's about how do you use reference columns when you're pointing to a user table to create particular rules. So going back to the access rules, when it's matching, then it's probably read only. We could have also done this as an or, but yeah, in all other cases, deny all. So we're saying on the whole table, it's read only, but with these 4 columns, we have special rules. If you are a manager, or if you are the person who's supposed to be looking at this, then you can read it. Just go ahead and save that. And then the other thing that we wanted to do was make it so that you only see sales attributed to you. So we're going to add a rule for sales. And you'll notice that rules are being added not by view, but by tables. So the underlying tables. So if the user access equals owner, allow everything. So Tina never gets locked out. Again, the manager should be able to read everything. But if you are the actual salesperson with that sale, so if you are the salesperson in that record, and it's a reference, let me just keep typing a bit more. Then you're allowed to do everything, otherwise deny. So what we're saying here is the exact same thing. In sales, if the sales rep, which is a reference column, matches the ID of the sales rep here, then they are allowed to do whatever they want to that record. They can edit it, update it. So we're going to save that. So I'm just going to pause here and show you what that looks like for Harry. So you can see Harry can see his payout information. He can see all the aggregate stuff. So here's that leaderboard we wanted. He can see his payout information, but everyone else's stuff is censored for him. He can see his sales, but if he clicks on the other ones, he can't see those sales. So that's the power of access rules. And what I wanted to really stress is it's based on, it's not by view, right? We're not setting rules by this page. We're setting rules based on what you can basically get at in raw data, which is all the tables that are here, including summary tables and the columns in those tables and data that's in the rows. Okay, let's go back to workflow and see if we're still on pace for what we want. So we want to make it possible for reps to enter their own sales data, okay, and see a leaderboard, but not see any other sensitive information. We want the business owner to see everything, including all of the other summary dashboards, but not edit anything. So if we go back, we didn't hide anything else from Harry yet, and one of the sales reps, and we want to. We only want his manager to be able to see certain things. So we want table rules for the other summary tables. So this was the total summary. I'm just going to add them to the bottom and then add the rules. So it's pretty simple. We're just going to copy and paste this manager one over and over. This is something that we're working on now. Just if you can group rules together, that would be great, because sometimes some tables have the same rules, sometimes they don't. It really depends on your use case. But in this one, there's a lot of ones that are very similar. So we can make that a little bit faster. Okay. Use read only. Okay, it's only 4, but could be more. Allow all. At least these shortcuts make it a little quicker. Here's the last one. Oh, read only. Okay, and then we can save that. So we'll finish doing the workflow and then make sure everything looks correct. So we want to make it possible for the business owner to see everything, but not edit anything. So now he has read only to all of the other summary tables as well. And then the very last thing is we want to make sure that sales reps cannot edit the commission rate when they're entering sales. So that was back in the sales table. That's where that commission rate was. We just want to make a column rule for commission rate. And what we're saying here is really if the user access is not an owner. So basically, if you're not Tina, you can read it, but you can't update it. So only Tina can update that column. And we're going to save that. So now we can go back to workflow, check that off. And now we can rearrange this on the left. So probably the most important dashboard is sales by rep. That's where most people are that's what most people will be using every single day when they come in here. Then there's sales over time, sales by customer. The workflow, we checked everything off. We can just either delete the table. I'm just going to remove it, but not delete it. So I'm deleting the page, but not the data, which means you don't see workflow here, but you do see it in raw data. So remember this, you can have tables that are not in any view. That is possible. So this might be something that just Tina cares about. But note that this doesn't hide it from access rules, which we'll see in a second. Just because it isn't visible here doesn't mean it's not visible to an end user if they have access to that table. And I'll show you that in a minute. We don't really need this view of sales here, so we can remove it. And remember, it is still here in raw data. You can still see the full sales table here. For customers, maybe this would be helpful if we captured some contact information. Maybe we want their email. Maybe we want to add their phone, some notes. And one of the things you can do with Grist is since you're making multiple views of the same data, you can do it on the same page. So I could add a widget here, which is customers as a card, linked to customers here, right? Flo and Sam is Flo and Sam in both tables, so it could be linked. So when I click on that one, it updates on the right. This is just, you've seen our lightweight CRM, it has this behavior as well. So I can hide the columns over here that I don't need. Make some more room. I can also edit the way that this card is laid out. Maybe if I click on this widget menu over here, edit card layout, maybe I want the phone number down here and the notes under here. So you can put this in any order you want. And it's probably fine for customers to be accessible the way this business is small enough where we're not protecting that yet. Maybe in the future we will. And then reps, it doesn't have to be here. It can just be in access rules. So I'll just remove this view, but I'm going to keep the table. I have to because access rules are based on this. This table has to exist for the access rules to work, even if it's not visible in the pages. So understanding that difference is helpful. So let me show you something else to reinforce that idea of like the views and the data is different. So let's go back to viewing this. Let's view it first as Larry. So Larry, oh, hold on, let's go back to access rules real quick. It's true for him. I want to make sure I didn't put a typo here and that he is still a manager. Totally real. Okay, just want to make sure I have his name correct before because I had added this before. Oh, I see. That's the problem. I had 2 ats in there in the table. Okay, that's the issue. There we go. Typos. I'm pretty bad at it, so it's a good thing I always double check that stuff. Okay, so we're viewing as Larry. with no more typos. So he can see everything. He can see everyone's sales. He can see sales over time, sales by customer, and all of the customers. And when he goes into raw data, he can see that workflow table as well, even though it's not here. That's what I wanted to reinforce. And the reason I'm reinforcing that is because what happens if a sales rep were to come in right now, like Harry, he has all of these things censored. He can't see other people's sales, but if he's clever and he knows about raw data, I didn't restrict him from making himself a manager. So that's why it's really important to think about who has access to what, to the data, not so much thinking about the view. And that's something, because he can make himself a manager, which is why my last recommendation would be, don't let him do that, because once he can do that, he's basically the same as Larry, right? So as the owner, I want to make sure I think about those things when I'm thinking about who can see what parts of the data. So thankfully, it's really easy to prevent him from doing that. I can just say, no, you're not a manager, go into access rules and create a table rule for reps. And the rule that I want to make here is that if the user is an owner, then everything is allowed, but everybody else is read only. So now Harry should not be able to do that. So even if he goes down into raw data, now he tries to make himself a manager and it's blocked. So that's why just because something isn't here doesn't necessarily mean you prevented it from raw data. And that's really important to keep in mind. Well, one more thing, actually, let's go back to being Harry, just to see now the actual workflow. Why did we set up all of these access rules, right? What was the point? Now that we're moving forward, Tina doesn't have to add everything. Different sales reps can come in here. They can add their own sales. So let's say it's now 2023, August, and Harry is adding a whole new customer. Oh, he needs to add it this way, add a whole new customer to the list. He's adding that, or maybe there's also another one here in 2022 in July, and this is an existing customer, and he's adding information here. So we're seeing all of this update for Harry, but what does Tina and the business owner see when they go to sales over time? Now we have Harry's sale in July, Harry's sale in 2023. All of this is automatically updating. She doesn't have to copy and paste and duplicate spreadsheets, figure out sums whenever somebody emails her, what's the sum today? It's all here. Someone can come log in and see it. So it makes things a lot easier. And the access rules make it so that everyone can work on the same copy, so it never falls out of sync, but they only see what's relevant to them. So yeah,